I've had quite a few comments recently asking if I could do something for beginners, so I thought I'd do a very simple painting on a smaller sheet of paper than I usually would, and just a few colours, so ultramarine, cobalt blue, raw sienna and burnt sienna. Nice complementary mix of 4 different colours, and I'm going to put in a very low horizon line just with a pencil, and so just a line all the way across, and that's basically it for the drawing. So horizon line basically where the sky meets the land. And I'm going to wet the paper all over, so just with some clean water, and don't completely soak it, but just wet enough just so the paint moves around on the surface. And I think just because maybe this is something for a beginner, I mean, it doesn't have to be basic, so I'm still going to do a painting with some nice atmosphere, like a stormy sort of sky, a nice little bit of land as well. I'm just going to presume that you all know what paper and paints and brushes are, but I'm going to use this mop brush and pick up some raw sienna. I'm using a piece of cotton paper as well, and I would suggest if you're just starting out, get the best paper that you can afford. It's more important than brushes and paint. You can't do a good watercolour on bad paper. Not really anyway, not in my experience. So do get the best paper that you can afford. And I'll just pick up a little bit of cobalt blue now. And just drop that in here and there into the raw sienna and allow it to mix together. You can be quite loose and quite free with this. Just use your imagination and find a nice sort of pleasing shape for a stormy sky. I'm working light to dark as well, so I'm getting the lightest tones in first. And now I've just picked up a little bit of ultramarine and put some burnt sienna into it, and that darkens it off. And now be quite bold, bring that straight across. And put a touch more water into it as well. And that lightens the paint and also allows it to move around on the paper a little bit more. And just using kind of like sweeping strokes just to create some cloud shapes. Just touching that into the cobalt blue and the raw sienna that's already on the paper and allowing it all to mix. Now I've just got some more ultramarine and burnt sienna, slightly darker mix now, and just lay that in on top again. And because it's still wet, you can keep going over it really. And now I'm looking to get the paint moving down the board, which I've got angled at about 30 degrees, and that allows the paint to move around in the water. And as I bring that down, and you can see that it's flowing with gravity, and that hopefully will create kind of like the look of maybe some rain in the distance. So maybe it's a storm cloud that's just passed over. And then with the cloud shapes, you kind of have to work with perspective with the sky as well as the land. So you see at the top the shapes of the clouds are larger, and then as you get closer to the horizon, just make them smaller, and then that helps with the illusion of distance. And now just looking at the shape that I've got and just trying to find a pleasing balance, so it's not too much dark on one side or another, not too many shapes on one side or the other, and just so it kind of balances out. And I'll just pick up a little bit more of that cobalt blue, and while the paper's still wet, just drop in just a distant hill or a distant tree line. And that's the first wash finished, so I'm going to allow that to fully dry. Okay, it's completely dry to the touch, and I'm just going to swap brushes, and I've got a size 4 round brush. And I'm going to use some of the blue that's left over from the sky and just add a little bit of burnt sienna and a little bit more ultramarine to it. And so I've got like a deep blue, and I'm going to bring that over where I put that distant hill in. And just drag it along, and using what's known as dry brush technique, which is a little bit misleading. It probably should be called dry paper, but it allows the paint to break up on the surface of the paper and create a little bit of texture. And so very simply just outlining like a distant tree line. And now I'll use some of that raw sienna that's left behind, and I'll put some blue into it just to make it ever so slightly green, and use exactly the same technique. So just dragging the brush across the surface of the paper, and it just adds a little bit of texture into the field area there, and without having to do really anything at all, creates little marks and sort of shadowy areas and an impression maybe that there's some light shining on the grass. And so now I've just got some burnt sienna, and same again, and I'll add a little touch of blue into that, and that makes it a bit darker, so it's still a dark brown sort of colour. And so getting ever so slightly darker as we come closer to us, and that helps with sense of distance and perspective as well. And so now just some raw sienna, and lay that in underneath. And a mixture of kind of everything on the palette now, so it's like a blue grey, and drop that in here and there as well. And so really, without having to do much at all, we're creating quite a nice shape of a field. And I've just got some burnt sienna, and it's a little bit wetter now, and with a touch of blue into it, and bring that right down into the foreground. And so like a basic rule of thumb would be to have lighter tones in the distance and darker tones closer to us, essentially. So just helps with the illusion that we're looking across into the distance. And so now I'm just going to put like a little bush or a tree just on the left hand side there, and have it silhouetted against that light, so it can go quite dark now. And so I've got more burnt sienna and ultramarine, and mixed with the greys that are left in the palette. I'll just use the side of the brush and just drag in a very basic kind of like a scrubby bush, the kind of thing that you might see on a marsh. So not making it look too pretty, so it's got a little bit of kind of atmosphere about it, and it's just quite an interesting shape rather than like a lollipop shaped tree or something like that. And so having it darker towards the base of the trees now, and just touching darker paint in here and there as well. That kind of helps to create a 3D looking object, so the little bushes and trees don't look too flat. Now just bring the base of the trees all the way down just to meet the land area. And still using the same dry brush technique as I used in the field. And they're just picking up some of the blues and the greys that are left, and just putting in a suggestion of a shadow. I mean, the light's behind the tree, so it's casting a shadow towards us. And that's very simply put in. So just mixing the colour, choosing where to put it and putting it straight in. Resist the temptation to keep going over it again. That's when you'll end up with a a very kind of muddy looking painting. It's always best if you can put things down in one go. And so just bring that all the way across now, a little darker area, just to create a little bit of separation between the distance and the foreground. And I'm just going to mix up my darkest paint now, again using burnt sienna and ultramarine, and it's almost black now. And I'll just add a little bit more texture into those trees. And the paint's slightly damp from before, so it is mixing together on the paper. And so really make that tree stand out now. So it's the darkest element in the painting. And just bring it down just to meet the land. And using some more of that dark paint, just bring up the slightest impression really that there's like a tree trunk sticking out the side there. And just a few little marks in the middle of the tree. I'll add some highlights to that in a minute, and I'll show you how I do that without using any white paint. And just a few slightly little vertical strokes there, and a little bit of texture just in the foreground. And I think I'll just put a few little fence posts in just on the right hand side there, like a little broken fence or something. And that kind of helps as a bit of a stopper to stop your eye drifting out to the right. And so a little finishing touch, I've just had a few highlights, and it's a plastic card, and the paint's gone tacky enough just so I can scratch into that now and just leave a little bit of light behind. And so it exposes some of the paper underneath. And I don't want to overwork it, I'm going to leave it as a very simple painting. Now there you go, that's the finished painting. So I'll just take the tape off so I can have a look. And like I said at the start, I think it's something that anybody can do really. It's aimed at beginners, but there's no reason why if you're just starting out painting, you shouldn't be painting, you know, finished pieces that have still got a bit of atmosphere and are nice to look at. So I use very simple techniques, just wet in wet, just for the sky there. So wet the paper all over and just drop your colours in, allow it to mix and move around, and then add in very basic land, but I think that's in a way more effective than if you spent hours and hours painting blades of grass. It's nice to have like an impressionistic feel, and then a very simple little row of shrubs or bushes or whatever they are, and some little fences, just to create a bit of a composition. So I hope you liked the video. If you did, let me know, and I'll be back again next week. So until then, happy painting, and I'll see you next week.